Hi everyone, welcome back to Pine Hollow out of Diagnostics. We're taking a little road trip this weekend to western Pennsylvania. I actually just dropped my wife off at her mom's house. She's visiting there. And we are going about half hour north to diagnose a 2004 Chevy 1500 that apparently the alternator was replaced, and then warning lights came on, it stopped shifting, and now it's a no crank, no start. The owner, I talked him through some basic checks. He checked the fuses. He tried replacing the ignition switch, the fuse box. I'm like, put everything back to stock. Send me a list of codes. And, well, no one can figure it out. So we're heading up there to take a look at it. So here we go. So on these road trips, oftentimes, running a little late, don't have time to stop to get food somewhere. One cool product, it's not diagnostics related, but they sent me this warm lunchbox. It plugs into your cigarette lighter. You set the temperature here, and then it just maintains that temperature. So, I grab a couple sandwiches at our local deli, and a warm sandwich tastes better than a cold sandwich. So, pretty neat device, and it's only 40 bucks on Amazon, so I thought, might as well share that, because it makes my trips that much nicer, that I have hot food right in my, little work truck here. Super easy. You just set it and it'll just keep it warm. You can dial it all the way up to, I think, 230 degrees if you want it real hot. But if you just want to keep your sandwich warm, nice insulated box. So it's a hot plate. We could even, because I'm curious, how accurate is this oven? So it's in Celsius, but yeah, that plate's hot. My sandwich is getting pretty toasty in there. So if you're on the road a lot and you want a hot lunch right in your car, check this thing out. Now let's go diagnose a Chevy. Alright, we're on site. Here's the victim, 2004 Chevy 1500. And you can see some stuff's torn apart, steering wheel's off of it. So the owner has been messing with it for weeks and weeks. And, well, hasn't gotten too far. So he said, if you energize the crank fuse and have this thing crank, it starts up and runs fine. So we're dealing with no power to the crank fuse, okay? Now I did some homework, printed out some diagrams, and we'll start with a full code scan. In the BCM, this B1440 power mode master input circuits mismatch. That's key. Something to do with the ignition switch, the power feeds to everything. Like the HVAC, it has some, right there, device ignition 3 circuit malfunction. That's also key. That probably is related to this issue. Anything else? Got some communication codes, but engine computer says we're good. So not an immobilizer problem. So let's try to crank it. Obviously, no crank. Alright. So let's take a look at the wiring diagram. Alright, so this crank fuse, where does it get its feed from when you turn the key to start? So we haven't verified the voltage on there yet, but we will. But it comes from ignition A fuse 40 amp. What else is on ignition A fuse? Let's see, in run we have brake, 4-wheel drive, cruise control, HVAC. So is that the ignition 3 feed? Most likely. And then we have TBC ignition 0 fuse 10, and these go to the PCM, transmission, and the BCM. So since the BCM is setting this power mode mismatch, let's go right into BCM and see, when we turn the key, do all the ignition power feeds come on. When we turn the key on, let's see, it says no comm. Let's try that again with the key on. Data stream. Security data. Now let's go back. data, outputs, inputs. Do we have ignition key and ignition? Okay, ignition 1, ignition 0. There should be an accessory. State ignition accessory. Okay, we want to look at those 4 data pits. Okay, so ignition 0 is off. Key and ignition, no. How about that? Ignition accessory active, ignition 1 is on. So if I turn the key back one click, what will change? Nothing changes. It still doesn't see the key in the ignition, and it still says ignition 0 off. Now ignition 1 turned off and ignition accessory is active. One more click back. Inactive. Okay, very good. So back to accessory. I should say active. Yep. And back to key on with all the dash lights on. Ignition 1 is on. So we're focused on ignition 0 is off and key in ignition. No. Right there. Ignition 0 fuse. Indeed, no power there. And no power to the crank fuse. I'm sure there's going to be no power to all these. We have to focus on ignition A fuse 40 amp. This red wire coming right to the ignition switch. Should be hot at all times. Alright, so I got a good power and ground here right from the battery. So with a test light, this is going to be a test light diagnosis. Test light connected to battery ground. If it finds a positive, obviously it's going to light up. So right at the ignition switch, on this red wire, pin F, there should be power all the time. And ignition switch connectors right here. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 5, 6, at least 6 wires. This is the red one. Look at that, no power as expected. The second part of the ignition switch is fed by a red and white through ignition B fuse. Again, it's basically just the second part of the switch. That should be hot at all times. So what about the red and white? Is that, I assume that's going to be just fine. If I can get in there and probe it. Yep, there we go. So the red and white is fine. The red is not. And where does that come from? This big junction connector. So let's see, red and white. Yes, that's high. And the red, so we're missing a power feed from the fuse box to this ignition switch. So we're getting really close. Ignition A fuse, there's no power here. At C201 there's no power. We have to go to the fuse box to B12C1 red wire, check for power there. Obviously we'll check the fuse at the same time. Alright, so at the fuse box, ignition A fuse is this one right here, 40 amp. I took it out and the customer already said it's good, but do we have a feed to that fuse? So test light from battery negative. Okay, so the upper pin is a feed, and this one's supposed to go right to the ignition switch. So the problem's going to be from here to the switch. Now we need to find out where B12C1 that is. I'm going to have to look up on all data which one of these wires is B12C1. Alright, all data to the rescue. And like I said, without all data I could not do my job whatsoever. So connector C1 is going to be on the right side of the fuse box. You can see the little pivots right there. That's going to be this big one on the right. Now which is pin B12? Again, you go to connector views. There's connector C1. B1 is here, B12 is down there. And then let's see by the wiring colors, go by sequencing. B1 is orange. So is that B1 orange, B2, B3, dark green, white, dark green, and white. Okay, yes, so this is B1, so B12 is going to be on the opposite end. Should be a red wire. Let's get a test light on there, see if that's hot. Alright, so I got the fuse back in, ignition fuse A. B12 is this fat red wire coming out the bottom. Boom, we got a bright test light. So the problem's not in the fuse box, it's going to be a broken wire between here and the ignition switch. It's going to be a green crusty somewhere. Now you can see the fender here, it's rusted through, so salt, corrosion, everything gets sprayed onto here. So let's dig out that wire and pull on it. Hopefully the problem's going to be close to this salty area, and this wire's hot at all times. See, it goes through here, through the pass-through, into the firewall, to this big junction connector to here. So there's the pass-through over there. Let me do some digging around. Hopefully we'll find the green crusties. Okay, so before getting too far and carried away looking for that broken wire, I like to do what's called a bypass test. We know that wire is supposed to be hot at all times, fed by the ignition A fuse. So let's bypass that suspected broken wire through a fuse. So again, you need a good power and ground coming from the battery. And I just have a terminal stuffed in here to that red wire. It's supposed to be hot at all times. 30 amp fuse. So let's plug this in to my constant power feed. Clear all the codes, see if the truck starts, and then we'll be 100% sure we're chasing the right problem. So here we go. That wire should be energized now. And let's just turn the key and see if our ignition 0 comes on. So accessory, excellent. Key in ignition, it still says no. I don't know why that is. Let's see if the truck actually cranks up and runs. It sure does. So we're definitely on the right track. We just have to restore power to that wire. While I'm here, I'm going to clear out all the codes and see what else we would fix by restoring that power. Let's clear all DTCs. Then we'll rescan it. Let's see, it still says service brake system. Check washer fluid. The cluster is going in and out. I don't know if the dimmer is a little wonky here. Service airbag. Service brake system. He said he had the airbags unplugged at some point, so maybe that's still unplugged. ABS and brake lights are still on. And we want to clear the codes out of the BCM. Let's see, clear fault code. Yes. A little light show going on. Okay. Now it's back out. Back out. Okay. Do a full key cycle. Now you notice that it doesn't beep when you have the key in and the door open. Okay. So it still has a brake problem. Let's rescan the whole vehicle. Alright, code scan is complete. We still have some codes here. Let's save this in a report. We'll still call it pre-repair. Okay, so BCM says key and ignition circuit malfunction. Yep, that's why that data pit is showing key wasn't in ignition. Temperature 1 control, temperature control 2 circuit malfunction. So whatever. Airbags, and then ABS says EBCM motor relay circuit. That could be a problem with the actual ABS module, but the truck starts and runs. So now we can go ahead and see where this wire is broken from the fuse box to this bulk connector. Okay, I got this big bulk connector unhooked. I just want to make sure that the pin for the red wire right there is not hot, so we're chasing the right thing. It's indeed not hot, while the opposite one down here is fine. So that is indeed the red wire coming to the back of that right there, going through the firewall. Well, let's do a quick close visual inspection. I started opening up the harness here, and look what we have right there. Eric O would be proud. There it is. Hot at all times in the salt belt. That's what you get. That's our problem. I'm going to show this to the owner. I'm going to get this soldered up, put everything back together. Truck should start up and run just fine.
Yep. Yeah, I'll leave you be. I don't bother you,
so we found the broken wire, and then what are the owner's thoughts here? What do you think, Clay?
That was amazing, actually, and quick. Very quick.
Efficiency, and yeah. No parts required is the bonus. You don't need new fuse boxes or modules or anything. So the reason why that wire is compromised is when this fuse box is in place, this exposed section of wiring harness is just rubbing right on that plastic. It went right through the wire, and then the salt corrosion finished it off. So we're going to fix that up and get this harness kind of relocated a little bit so it doesn't do that again, and should be back on the road. Alright, so for safety, battery's disconnected. We got the fuse box out of the way, harness is pulled up. I think Erico would call this a green pus sack. Yeah, there's not much. The whole wire's swollen up. Crazy stuff. So let me cut that portion out. I don't know if this will be long enough to just solder back together. Yep. Alright, so the wire here was obviously too short after cutting out all of the green crusty part. You want to make sure you have nice clean copper to work with. So we're going to solder in an extension. Make sure the gauge of the wire is approximately matching the original. This is a thick, like 12 gauge power wire. So let's solder that on. TS100 soldering iron. Some guy in the comments was like, why do you keep talking about your soldering iron? Because it's amazing. Like, I'm just impressed every time I use this little thing, how fast it heats up and how efficient it is, and how you can get into tight spaces where, right here you don't want to use butt connectors, even if they're those that style that seals or whatever. I just don't trust it. So we're going to heat up this joint. It takes a bit longer than smaller gauge wire. You want to melt some solder on there to help the heat transfer. The solder is going to wick into the strands. We'll do that on both sides of the wire. There it goes. Beautiful. I'll touch it up on this side right here. Okay, totally happy with that joint. Let's put some shrink wrap on there, solder the second part. Alright, final verification of repair. Yes, we got juice on the red wire, and I bulletproofed this harness. I even put plastic conduit, protectant, so even if it's smashing up against this bracket, it's not going to rub through. This is where the original harness was, and that's just the original routing, typical GM. That shouldn't rub through ever again. Make sure it starts up and runs. Perfect. Alright, guess that was an easy one. Thanks a lot for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.